Our next guest knows a thing or two about being on the road. That's what he did for years as a scout, as a VP of player personnel, as a GM. And he's been on the road for the last month for NBC Sports, going from training camp to training camp. Scott Pioli, newest member of the NBC Football Night in America team, former Chiefs GM, former Patriots VP of player personnel on the program now. Scott, what do you say?
Mike, great to be on with you. And you're right, it has been a long road, although I haven't been in a Motel 6 myself here in the last couple of nights, but it has been a long but fun road. Really enjoying it.
And it actually got started not at the NFL level, but at the college level. You first spent some time out at Stanford, and they have, in kind of sneaky fashion, become an elite college team. What did you see while you were there that helps support this idea that Stanford is a force to be reckoned with going forward?
Well, Mike, like you say, about 4 weeks ago now, I was out at Stanford for about a week and had a chance to do a number of things. They hadn't fully started their training camp yet, but I got to spend some time with David Shaw and also with Shannon Turley, who's there. There's this new age that's no longer strength and conditioning coaches; they're player performance. And what I got a chance was to see a little bit behind the curtain, their team working and finishing their off-season program and beginning their testing, which is, from a scouting standpoint, you don't always get to see things like that. And here's what they've got a group of people. It starts with the head coach, I guess. They've got a head coach who's an alum who loves that place and is all in with Stanford. And during, Jim Harbaugh's time there, they started bringing in a different caliber of player. They were attracting a different caliber of player. And they have just they've got a really strong roster, and they've been able to perpetuate this whole thing by, success breeds success. So as they've won, they've been on the radar for a little bit different type of recruit. They're still getting very smart guys. They're still getting the, Stanford kind of guys, but they're getting Stanford kind of guys that are really good football players. And what they've got there is a program that is just really tight. And they know what they're doing. They know what they're looking for. And they're going to be a force, Mike, and they're going to continue to be a force. I think David Shaw is one of the finest football coaches in the country. And, that's where it starts with all that. And
how much longer until that Stanford alum, David Shaw, decides to head to the National Football League? He's got to be on the radar screen.
I'm certain that he is. I know that he is. It's going to be a really interesting thing, though, because he's been on the radar before, and I think that there's been some people that have tried to court him in the past. And I'll say this, he does have some background in the NFL. So he's been an assistant coach. He's spent time there. He comes from a football family. A lot of people don't know that. But I also know that he loves Stanford. I mean, he truly does. He's got strong family values. And I don't know if you've ever been on that campus, but it's truly one of the finest campuses in the country. And he's raising his family right there. And it's going to have to be a great situation, I think. And I'm not, this is not what he told me, but I can just, reading between the lines, I can tell it's going to have to be a tremendous situation and a great opportunity because he can be choosy. But I think people will continue to come after him, but I don't think that he's a guy who really believes that his life or his career is going to be, he's not going to be a success whether he works in the NFL. It doesn't have to take him working in the NFL for him to be a success in his mind, which is a really smart place for anyone to be.
Visiting with Scott Pioli, the former Chiefs GM, Patriots VP of Player Personnel, now with NBC's Football Night in America. You also were in South Bend. The Fighting Irish are trying to follow up an unexpectedly great season. You were able to attend some practices. What's your take on where Notre Dame is now moving forward?
They're a good football team, and they're really well coached. Actually, the couple of days that I got to spend with them, Mike, they were away from South Bend. Brian Kelly is a really smart guy, really thoughtful guy, and he took his team away from South Bend for a couple of days up in the middle of nowhere in in Marion, Indiana, which is the home of James Dean, which I'm sure you didn't know, Mike, where James Dean was born and buried. And it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, quite honestly. And they spent a couple of days out there practicing and living in this park, in this barracks type housing, for bonding and a lot of different purposes. And I think that they've got three players, on that football team that if all three come out for the draft, I know two of them are are seniors and draft eligible, but I think that they've got three first-round draft picks sitting in there. They've got 2 defensive linemen and an offensive lineman. The tackle who may be one of the best players, he'll be among the best offensive linemen in the country. And it's a really talented football team. But I'll tell you, what really impressed me about the whole Notre Dame thing is the way that Brian ran practices. And they did it with an intensity and a purpose, but they also didn't work so crazy where it was too hard. And he's got a fine young staff. I also got some time to spend with their defensive staff and watch tape with them and listen to them. And Bob Diaco, who's their defensive coordinator, they've got 4 former Iowa Hawkeyes on their staff and 2 Michigan Wolverines, which is an interesting mix. But they're a really smart staff and a really talented and energetic staff. I think Notre Dame is going to be a really good team again this year.
And since your visits to Stanford and also with Notre Dame, you've been bouncing around the NFL training camps. What's been the biggest surprise that you've seen so far during your camp tour?
One of the pleasant surprises was my first visit, the Cleveland Browns. And I think, because of the dynamics in their division and because of their team, I think that they're a better and more talented team than people are fully aware of. And, I think Chud, with the help of Norv Turner, who I believe Norv is one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, even though he's been a head coach. Whenever he's a coordinator, and even the time that he was a head coach, the offense performs well. And whatever Brandon Weeden is and whatever his ceiling is, I think Norv and Chud are going to get him there. And so I think that they're going to be a little bit better team than most people think. I think they've got a good operation, good organization that won't allow there to be a lot of distractions to the players in terms of them performing. I think that was a pleasant surprise. I think, Jacksonville yesterday, I spent 2 days down in Jacksonville. That was a really interesting operation because the makeover, in time, they are going to be a good football team. Along the way, I think they'll win some games because Gus Bradley is a tremendous coach. And I also think that David Caldwell, there's a group of people down there right now in the front office from the personnel standpoint where David Caldwell, Chris Polian, and Kyle O'Brien, who's a director of college scouting, are really going to make that team different. You can already see that some of the talent they brought in this year has really upgraded the football team. What you can see, when I used to look at the Jaguars from a distance, I wasn't always sure as to what kind of team they were or what they were trying to be. When you used to look at the Oakland Raiders, for instance, Mr. Davis was always going to have a height, weight, speed, fast football team. And different teams, you can look at them physically and say, okay, here's their identity, or see their style of play and say, okay, here's this team's identity. The Jaguars haven't really had that, but they've got a new ownership, and Shad Khan and his son Tony Khan, it's clear to me in the time there as I'm watching the entire football operation, you've got a head coach and a general manager that are truly on the same page, and you've also got an ownership that is willing to do anything and everything to help these guys do their jobs. And a lot of teams will say that, or you'll hear that come out of their camp, or coaches and players may say that. But I tell you what, in the 2 days that I was there, it's clear that Shad and Tony are going to do everything that they need. And they're people with, their football leadership are people with a purposeful direction. We're not going to see a change. I don't know how much of a change there'll be this year, but they're certainly going to get that ship turned in the right direction.
Talking to Scott Pioli from Football Night in America, former VP of Player Personnel in New England, former GM in Kansas City. You've been around teams this time of year as we get closer and closer to the cuts. Give us a story from a time that you were involved in a cut, something, you don't have to give the guy's name, but just give us a good story where you've been involved in cutting a guy.
Well, it's Mike, I could tell you a million stories. I mean, going back to the time when I was a slappy in Cleveland, and my job was to actually, I was the guy they called the Turk, where I would have to go downstairs and get the guy and bring him to Bill's office, and then also it morphed into this role where I was actually the guy going to get them, and I would have to give them the goodbye time. I remember there's this one player early on in the transition where there were a lot of guys that weren't Bill Belichick players. They were from the old regime, and there was a couple of angry guys. And again, I'll leave the name out, but I had to walk him up the stairs, and the guy was grumbling the whole way. And what I had been told was, listen, no matter what they say, don't say anything back because you have to be careful about what you say. You don't want to, get them upset. You don't want to instigate them. You're going to see different personalities. And as we got to the top of the stairs, he started asking me, what are we going up here for? And I said, well, Bill wants to see. He goes, no, what the F are we going up here for? And he knew, but he was starting to get angrier. And then he actually literally physically confronted me, and I thought there was a chance that he was going to try to throw me off the top of the staircase. And fortunately, I was quicker than him to get to the door and get out, and I didn't end up getting thrown actually over the railing or down the staircase. It was during the cuts you see the range of emotions. It's everywhere, and here's what I learned during that time though is you are dealing with someone at quite possibly one of the, if not the worst moments of their life. Whether you're accurate or not in cutting them, you're taking something from them that is their dream. It's their paycheck. It's their livelihood. It's the way that they support their family. It's all that most of them know what to do up in that stage in life, and you're telling them that it's over. And it may be, and they don't know if it's over for good, and they don't know, or if it's just going to be a transition to a new club. But it's one of the times where you're telling someone or you're inferring to someone that they can't do something that is their life's work. And I tell that story in retrospect, and it's kind of a funny story, but the reality is, in all the years that I did this in the NFL. That is by far the toughest job, is when you've got to tell someone, hey, essentially you're fired. And it's different from other jobs when you let people go. It's never good to let people go. And, hey, I've been fired. I know what that feels like. And it's a tough moment emotionally because there's just this absence of direction and not, and most of the people in this industry, there's a lot of testosterone. And it's disheartening on a lot of levels.
Well, it's great stuff, and it's great insights, and I'll start calling you the Turk from now on. Just don't be the Turk at NBC. Thanks. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you soon,
Actually,
Scott.
That'd be one of the nicer things I've been called in recent months, Mike.
All right, see you, buddy. Good stuff.
Thanks.
Scott Pioli, NBC's Football Night in America.